Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this. This is What's Left. I'm your host, my name's Larry Erickson, and for the next half hour I'm going to be talking about a couple of things that I hope you will find interesting enough to stay with us for. If you have any reactions to the show, any comments or questions, you can send them to me directly. This is my personal email here, whoviating@aol.com. And if you missed that, or I didn't run out and get a pencil and paper to write it down, well, you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. The URL will be somewhere around here a few times during the show. You can go there, you can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather do that. If you do send me email, I just have, as always, I have my two requests. One is to include something in the subject line that makes it clear it's about the show, it's not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer because I'm just terrible about email. All right, so let's get on with it. I'd like to start with some good news, and I knew I'd be talking about this one. Chelsea Manning is out of prison. Now, for those of you with ridiculously short memory spans, she is the former Army intelligence analyst who, hoping to inspire what she said was a worldwide discussion, debate, and reforms, was the source for the biggest leak of classified information in U.S. history, including notably the video that went viral, which became called Collateral Murder. And if you haven't seen it, look it up. She was freed Wednesday morning at actually about 3 a.m. Wednesday morning. I think it's from the start, from the very start, from the moment that she was arrested after being betrayed by a supposed friend, she has been treated wrongfully, shabbily, terribly. She was charged, in effect, with treason, with aiding the enemy. And although they didn't convict her on that, they did convict her on a variety of charges under the Espionage Act. She was sentenced to 35 years in prison, of which she served 7, which even at that is more than twice as long as any other leaker or whistleblower has ever spent in prison. And while in prison before her court-martial, she was held in solitary confinement under extreme prevention of injury conditions, even after a psychologist said that that wasn't necessary. This, in effect, there's only one reason for this possibly, is that they were hoping to break her, to get her to testify and throw Julian Assange under the bus because he actually was their real target. And the treatment was petty even in some ways, because even after agreeing to provide the necessary treatment for her after 2 suicide attempts and a hunger strike, but after agreeing to provide the treatment she was entitled to, including approving gender reassignment surgery, which is an open admission and acceptance that she is transgender, even at that point they still kept her in an all-male prison and demanded that she go by male grooming standards until the very moment of her release. And by the way, if you're wondering in the picture, she's wearing a wig. But she's out, but she's not free. Until the appeals of her conviction are over, the military considers her to be unpaid active duty. And so she's still under the rule of the military law. And as the old saying goes, military justice is to justice as military music is to music. Now, there's one good thing about this, one advantage, is that by saying that she's active duty, it maintains her access to the military health benefits to which she's entitled, including for gender dysphoria and gender reassignment surgery if she wants it. But she's actually said she has no interest in using those benefits because after the way she was treated in prison, she just wants to turn her back on it and just go for herself and take care of herself. Now, it is, even though she's technically active duty, it's highly unlikely she would ever be called to active service, but hypothetically she could be. And any new offense, even if a minor one, if she got into a fight, she got into a shoving match with somebody, she would be under the military law jurisdiction. She could even get in trouble with the military by saying or writing something that was critical, something some general somewhere just didn't take a liking to. Still, despite all that, she said, and this is a quote, "For the first time I can see a future for myself as Chelsea." And she said one of the first things she wants to do is grow her hair out. In the meantime, family and friends are keeping her basically under wraps in order to ease her transition, or I actually should say transitions, because she's making two, one from prison to the outside, and one into her new life as Chelsea. Amnesty International had campaigned for Manning's release, and it celebrated her freedom, but still called for an investigation into the treatment she received and called for measures to make sure that future whistleblowers are not again subject to what they called such appalling treatment. All right, next up, here's just an interesting little tidbit here. A guy named Tom Hicks, he lives in Chesterfield, Virginia, and he's got a pickup truck. And on the back of the truck, he painted a Bible verse drawn from 1 Corinthians. Women shall be silent and submissive. He added 3 crosses, the fish symbol, and the expression, read the Bible. Got a lot of flack for it, people calling him a sexist, you know, denouncing his retrograde notions about women. Here's the kicker. Tom Hicks is an atheist who did this, he said, because he wanted people to start thinking about what it is that their holy book actually teaches. Which actually does serve to raise a question, which is, you know, how many atheists are there in the United States? Now, Pew and Gallup, which are two of the most respected and reputable polling firms in the U.S., both say that about 10% of Americans say they do not believe in God. But the number actually may be significantly more, because there is a social stigma attached to saying, I'm an atheist. So, the University of Kentucky psychologists Will Gervais and Maxine Nalga, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her name right, they wanted to do a study that was designed to sort of enable somebody to say that they were an atheist without the social stigma involved. I won't bother going into the methodology. You can ask me if you want. But by their best estimate, 26% of the American public does not believe in God. And there's a 99% certainty, they said, that it's greater than 11%, which means even at the low end, there's still more than we thought there were. Now, something related to that, which is partly why I got into this, in his commencement speech at Liberty University, which is probably one of the few places he can go now without getting protest, but in his commencement speech, TheRump declared, in America, we don't worship government, we worship God. Which really means, to come right down to it, he's saying that you can't really be an American if you're an atheist, or an agnostic, or an animist, or a Jainist, or a Buddhist, or any of several variations of Hindu, or a Taoist, or a deist, or the follower of any other of a multitude of non-theistic religions. In fact, you have to be Judeo-Christian to be an American, and I'm not sure that all the people around him would include Judeo in that. Oh, you could also, you know, there's also Muslims who will say that Allah and the Judeo-Christian God, they say that's the same being. Allah is just a different name, but they don't count as Americans because, you know, they're Muslim. Which also in turn raises something else about TheRump and those around him, which actually is why I brought this all up in the first place. It's something that unites the Muslim ban with the wall with Mexico. Unites the horror stories about the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and I think ICE is just a wonderfully appropriate acronym for them. But how ICE is grabbing people in court, trying to get into schools to investigate kids, deporting people who have green cards. There's a sharp increase, and they're targeting undocumented immigrants who have no criminal records to deport them. It connects all that with the slowness that the White House displayed in condemning the wave of anti-Semitic and racist incidents that arose in the wake of TheRump's election. It connects with the push to undo federal consent agreements with various police departments that would let these racist and violent police departments go back to being racist and violent without oversight. And even it connects to the state of Texas, which enacted a law to punish local police authorities with removal from office, fines, and prison if they do not submit to demands for cooperation from federal immigration agents. And they did this despite the fact that every major police chief in Texas opposed it. By the way, sidebar, a news article about that Texas law said it was about officials, quote, who do not abide by requests to cooperate with the feds. You know, if you can't say no without being fired, fined, and jailed, that ain't no request. Irene, it really does stink. Any event, all those strands that I listed, all those threads that I listed, there is something that unites all of them and more, which is that these people we are dealing with, they are not merely racists who hate based on race. They are not merely religious bigots who hate based on religion. They are truly, in the true sense of the word, they are xenophobes. They hate and fear everybody who is not them, who is other, who in their minds is not one of us. And their xenophobia, the xenophobia they expressed in various ways, has made it acceptable, has enabled it to be acceptable, more acceptable than it has been in decades, to be openly and publicly bigoted and even to take pride in your bigotry. And even if these people, even if this administration turned on a dime today, that effect, that xenophobia, that bigotry, that racism, that anti-Semitism, and all the rest that they released and justified is going to be with us for some time to come. It would take time to pound that back into the fetid, dank cave from which it arose. So even if they turned on a dime today, it would not undo the damage that they have done there. And for that, I tell you here, I will never, ever forgive them. All right, next, again, the same, showing the kind of people that we are actually dealing with here. Here's something else. In a memo to federal prosecutors made public on May 12th, Attorney General Jeff Too Racist to Be a Judge Sessions ordered federal prosecutors to seek the maximum punishment for drug offenses, directing them to file, quote, the most serious, readily provable charges that carry the most substantial, most serious punishment, including mandatory minimum sentences. This was after he spouted that hoary bit of doggerel, just say no, as if addiction were something you could just stop doing, and as if dealing with the emotional pressures and stresses that lead to drug abuse is the same as deciding to not have a second donut. This is a reversion to the worst of the bad old days of the miserable failure that was the war on drugs. How bad is this? How bad is it? Well, Mick Mulvaney, director of the Office of Management and Budget and former recipient of the Clown Award, is proposing cutting the budget of the Office of National Drug Control Policy by 95%, essentially eliminating the agency. Now, a good part of what that agency did and does has to do with law enforcement, with dealing with cops and, you know, that kind of thing. But another good part of what this agency did was things like public education campaigns and sharing and distributing information about drug treatment. We are today losing more people to opioid overdose than we lost to AIDS at the height of the epidemic. And all these bozos can think of is lock them up. One light note related to this, the compromise bill to fund the government through September extends a provision that bars the Department of Justice from going after marijuana growers, sellers, and users in places that have legalized medical marijuana. All right, here's another thing, just another way of looking at, another comment on the people that we are dealing with. You undoubtedly know about the meeting that TheRump had with the Russian foreign minister and ambassador, where he went off script and in the course of bragging about the great intel that he gets, wound up blabbing classified information that came from Israel and was so highly classified it hadn't even been shared with our allies. But what I found more revealing was some contingent things that came out related to this. One is that the National Security Council still prepares multi-page briefings for TheRump for his meetings with foreign leaders, but he insisted that such guidance be distilled to a single page of bullet points, and then he often ignores those. According to some White House officials, TheRump actually can't hurt U.S. security because he is such an indifferent reader of the briefing materials that he simply does not possess enough knowledge to actually reveal information about methods and sources that actually would be harmful. And some of his advisors and staff are afraid to leave him alone in meetings with foreign leaders for fear that he's going to say something untoward or insulting. Here's the thing. Donald TheRump is not stupid. He's not a stupid man. I mean, we can make all the jokes we want, but in reality, we know he's not a stupid man. And what he is, though, he's a genius at self-promotion. In fact, he self-promoted himself right into the White House, which, you know, you may recall if you have long memories. Last spring, I said all that you need to know about Donald TheRump is that he's a real estate salesman. And that I wondered at the time if he really wanted to be president or if he just wanted to see if he could become president, if he could pull off the greatest pitch of all. But what all of this makes clear is that he's not stupid. But what all of this stuff makes clear is that he is simply incompetent. He is not competent to be president. This has nothing to do with his policies, nothing to do with his practices, nothing to do with the internal politics of the White House. The man is simply incompetent. Take a break. And here we are back again, and we're back with one of our regular features. This is the Clown Award, given as always for meritorious stupidity. And as I've said before, there are various types of stupid. There are various categories of stupid. This one is a case of stupid that is just simply ridiculous. So the big red nose this week goes to Hillary Clinton. On May 15th, Clinton grandly declared that she is part of the resistance, the spontaneous opposition to the cruelty, bigotry, and sheer venality that is the administration of Donald TheRump. Apparently, under the illusion that we have all been waiting breathlessly for her reemergence into political life, she announced the formation of a new group called Onward Together, with the name and logo that point back to her campaign slogan of Stronger Together. And in case that didn't make it clear enough that the actual goal here is to redirect the explosion of grassroots energy that we've seen of late into support for the institutional Democratic Party and its candidates, she wrote to supporters saying that the new group, quote, is dedicated to advancing the progressive vision that earned nearly 66 million votes in the last election. In other words, the vision that supported her and the party. And in case that didn't make it clear enough, she also hinted that Howard Dean is going to be involved in some capacity, as if she expected us all to get all aflutter at the very idea. Make no mistake, okay, this is not about supporting the resistance. This is about leading the resistance. This is not about being part of the resistance. This is about being the resistance. This is about defining the resistance. This is about turning the resistance into simply another arm of the institutional Democratic Party. That is an idea whose time, if it hasn't already passed, should have already passed. And to the extent that Hillary Clinton imagines herself being a leader of, a spokeswoman for the resistance, that is also true of her. And that makes her a clown. All right, next up, this is just something that it struck me bitterly amusing. It was an article in the Washington Post. It had the headline, "You're not getting a raise and nobody knows why." Started saying about the economy, you know, it looks pretty good. You know, there are new jobs popping up. The unemployment rate is down. Consumer and business confidence is up. But the one thing that really matters, especially for workers, is something that hasn't happened. Wage growth. And they said no one knows precisely why wage growth has lagged behind, but economists have a few explanations. And they went on things about the labor participation rate is low still. They said productivity gains are not as high as they had been, and blah, 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 blah. They, for the most part, avoided the simple and the obvious answer. Why aren't you getting a raise? Because the bosses can get away with not giving you one. Because we're still worried about our futures. We're still fearful that the next paycheck will be our last. We're still holding on to what we have. When we look around at the physical economy that we see around us, what do we see? 3,500 retail stores have closed in the first months of 2017. Oh, we'll get told, oh no, but online business is booming. Yeah, well, we've already been through a dot-com, boom and bust, so come to me in a few years before I'll believe that. But the fact is, most of us do not work in the online economy, which, when you consider all the stories about how outfits like Amazon.com actually treat their workers, that online economy doesn't look like a pretty good alternative anyway. Meanwhile, the official, which is actually too low, but the official poverty rate is still at 13.5%. which is higher than it was before the 2008 crash. It's 21.4% among Hispanics, 24.1% among blacks, 28.3% for single-race Native Americans and Alaskan Natives. Meanwhile, we are working more hours. We're working more hours in the week. But despite that, real median household income, despite some gains over the last 2 years, is below where it was in 2007, which is below where it was in 1999. We have gone through more than 15 years of work to wind up behind where we started. It's to the point where the classic American dream is dead or dying for a lot of us. Now, the baseline of that dream, I've been saying this literally for more than 40 years, and I was far from the first one to actually say this, but the basic line idea of the American dream is that your kids will be better off than you. That your kids will have a better life than you did. That whatever struggles you have now, at the end of it all, your kids will have it easier than you did. Well, the blunt fact is that according to recent research, for a lot of us, that just isn't true anymore. Among children born in the 1940s, more than 90%, or about 90%, grew up to make more money than their parents did. For children born in the 1980s, that figure is 50%. Half of us are growing up to be no better off and possibly worse off than our parents were. It all leads to this. The bottom line of all this is that a great many of us feel trapped, are trapped. Our only escape from a job we are overworked and underpaid is to switch to another job where we will be overworked and underpaid in a different way. The result is that the bosses have the power, with profits to gain and nothing to lose, by saying, I'm not giving you a raise, and if you don't like it, tough. And yet these economists, these brilliant number crunchers, these gods of prognostication, who insist on treating our economy, our entire economic system, like some machine with dials to be tweaked with predictable results, regard it that way instead of regarding it as what it is, a system rampant with greed and power hunger. They are dumbstruck at the idea that wages simply are not rising. If we want to change what will be, we have to change what is. And that means attacking the power of the bosses. The fight for a $15 minimum wage, that is a good start. We should look to going a lot further. Now, something not directly connected to that, but still related because it does impact the economy. Every year, the Congressional Progressive Caucus puts out an alternative federal budget. Now, it's not a page of bullet points in a press release. It's an actual budget proposal, an actual progressive, or at least reasonably progressive, alternate federal budget. Every year, the media takes quick note of the proposal, praises its practicality, and then immediately and totally ignores it until the next year. Well, this year that budget is called the People's Budget, a Roadmap for Resistance, fiscal year 2018. Maybe this can be the year that it can get more than a quick glance, and a link to the budget can be found on my website. But one area where I feel that that for the last few years that the Progressive Caucus has downplayed in its budget is defense spending. They used to be clearer and harder on the need not just to contain expansion of our various wars, but to turn them back and indeed to slash the size of the military budget, which takes up half of all discretionary spending in the federal budget. In fact, the proposed military budget, not just the Defense Department, the total military budget proposed for fiscal year 2018 is $824 billion, including $76 billion for our various wars. Now, I said about a month ago that what we were seeing with the Rump's administration is militarism unleashed as national policy. I said it was the outrage of the week. The weeks since have given me no reason to change that, and so this is, again, the outrage of the week. We have deepening direct involvement in the fighting in Syria with maybe 1,000 more ground troops to help with the fight to take ISIS's self-proclaimed capital of Raqqa. And now there's an agreement to provide arms to the Kurdish fighters that are sort of taking point on that fighting. And note well, this is important, note well, the Army of the Kurds was something that the outgoing Obama administration wanted the incoming TheRump administration to sign off on. Reports are that Michael Flynn, Trump's former national security advisor, rejected the idea, and some say it's because Turkey is opposed to arming the Kurds and Flynn is a registered agent of Turkey. But whether or not that's true, the point here is that this is not, arming the Kurds is not TheRump's policy, it's the Pentagon's policy. And then there is the fact that TheRump's most senior military and foreign policy advisors have proposed a major shift in strategy on Afghanistan that would put the U.S. back on a war footing with the Taliban. It would add 3,000 troops to the 8,400 already there, authorize the Pentagon, not the White House, to set troop levels in Afghanistan, and give the military far broader authority to use airstrikes on targets of its choice. In other words, it is again, as it is in Syria, as it is in drone strikes, as it is in North Korea, as in Iraq, it's let the Pentagon do what it wants. I say it again, what we have here is militarism unleashed as national policy. And it is time the progressive left stopped ignoring military spending, stopped ignoring weapons spending, stopped ignoring the constant background drumbeat of death. Because that drumbeat, and even more ignoring it, that is an outrage. All right, I'm told I'm out of time, so we're just going to have to cut that right off where we are right now. We'll get back to you next week, hopefully with happier stuff. But for the moment, you have the best week you possibly can. And as always, peace.